All right. What is going on, everyone? Welcome on into the Check Your Brain podcast. My name is Tony Mazur. Thank you for listening to this on the free podcast platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever. Also, Rumble, YouTube, X. And if you want more from me, go to Patreon at patreon.com/Tony Mazur, TonyMazur. Enough about me. Let's get to my guest. I'm very pleased to have him on. He is the author of the new book, American History Z, which is Gen Z's a journey to the far right, and it's Joey Oliver. And yeah, you can go check him out if you're watching on the video right now. There's the cover of the book, and go to was it arctos.com? And you can find it there. And you could also find Joey on his YouTube channel, which is where I found him, the Right Wing Coalition. It's at the THERW Coalition on YouTube, and go check him out. He does some great work right now. And yes, he is Gen Z. I'm millennial, and I've been talking about the generational wars that have been going on that I wish we didn't have to get into, but I didn't start these wars. And but again, I'm pleased to have him on the podcast. Joey, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me, man. Appreciate it.
So I want to get a little bit of your backstory because I'm fascinated by how people get into this. There's some people who are, especially when you're on the right, you have the cradle conservatives. I was one of them. I remember when I was 8 years old, outside of a polling place, handing out flyers for Bob Dole. Ugh. Anyways, but we were raised as what they called rush babies. You would drive around in the car, and my mom and or dad would have Rush Limbaugh playing. Talk
Sure.
radio conservatives, Fox News was on the TV all the time. And eventually, probably somewhere in my mid 20s, I had my awakening moment by saying, yeah, why am I listening to Mark Levin right now? Like, there's other options. And then it's been red pill after red pill ever since. So I wanted to hear your coming of age story. What red pilled you? What you got you into this and interested in it?
Yeah, well, I didn't actually start particularly right wing, more of just a default liberal, uninitiated. My parents weren't particularly interested in politics either. My mom more so than my dad, but regardless, I wasn't instilled with a specific ideology from my early days. I became interested in politics, I would say, kind of around the rise of like the new atheist movement. I was interested in those types of figures at the moment, or at that current moment, because it was sort of just a challenge to what appeared to be the status quo, which I didn't realize was really a reinforcement of it. Um, but then I sort of abandoned political interest in my later teen years. I'm 27, so this was maybe early 2010s at the time. Um, and I kind of abandoned it in my late high school and college years. And then I was an architecture student in college, and I remember there was a few things that had happened when I was in college that really kind of struck a nerve in terms of what had been going on with the left. I remember when I was a freshman, I'd written some defense of free speech that my teacher really disagreed with, and I thought that was curious. And at the time, it was more of like, well, I thought the left was, the party of free speech, not really realizing how politics worked at the time. And then what kind of got me involved in more current events was looking into communism. And I think this was a direct result of like guys like Jordan Peterson talking about it. I read the Gulag Archipelago and the George Floyd explosion. Of course, I would say I was red pilled to the, like, I was already on the right by that time. I was more maybe libertarian, and
That's usually the jump. You go from
yeah.
being apolitical or even liberal to libertarian, and then a factor of things happen in the world or the world around you, and then all of a sudden you're Franco next.
Exactly. And, and like things like racial differences, I always knew that was real. Like I actually remember writing something in college when I was a freshman about that, and being kind of scolded by my professor for it. And I'm like, what do you mean? This is just true. And I wasn't deriving some type of value judgment from it, but it was an acknowledgement and a recognition of it at the same time. And so when I saw the Floyd stuff happen, that really solidified me in the perspective of, okay, I'm staunchly, genuinely right wing. I'm not like some type of civic nationalist at this point. Like I understand the realities of, kind of the nature of politics, the nature of civilization, and then the crossover, that happens when you take this propositional approach. From there, I got a lot more interested in kind of the theory of politics, and I wrote a novel when I was in my early 20s, and I got it published. But it's like when you're a nobody, and that wasn't like what I did full time or anything like that. But so I had some type of ability writing, and when I saw the coverage of Nick Fuentes last July, I think it was, because I had been following Fuentes for a few years at that point, and I just saw that it was such a dishonest portrayal, and I wanted to explain to somebody what the real story was, or at least the a proper fair narrative, because everything's a narrative, of course. And so I made my first video, and this was like almost a year ago exactly, anonymous. I was like, I'm just gonna we'll just see what this does. I was interested in politics. I would have liked to be, somebody in politics, or at least, from the commentator perspective, but I had no mechanism for that. Literally zero. Didn't know anyone that he was in, even peripherally in the vicinity of that. And then that took off, and then I basically just continued. And then after I wrote my probably most famous essay, Gen Z from liberal to far right, which is like an 8,000 word condensement of my book. That blew up, and my publisher Arctos reached out, and then I ended up publishing that in their journal, which became like their most popular essay. And then we talked about turning into a book because 8,000 words for a decade is a bit light. And then I decided, if I'm going to publish this, I need to put my name to it, and so just as a matter of principle. And so that's kind of where we are now.
Yeah, I can't, looking back, and I hate keep referring to myself and my background a little bit, but it's so fascinating how, because I'm 11 years older than you, I'm 38, and I came of age in the 90s, and I still remember the days of that you hear about the millennial nostalgia of, oh, we're going to
Yep.
Blockbuster Video and we're
Yep.
renting a movie and we're playing N64, and there's a lot of bad stuff that also happened. We kind of remember that a large chunk of the country were very happy that O.J. Simpson was found not guilty in 1995, but we'll get to
Right.
maybe some of that stuff
Yeah.
a little bit later on. But I look around at my generation, the 40-year-old or almost 40-year-olds, and they're in this malaise right now because when I'm hearing Dan Crenshaw, Eye Patch McCain, as Nick Fuentes has referred to him, talking about, oh, when I was your age, I was eating ramen. I'm thinking, Dan Crenshaw's 4 years older than me, so he's it's like he's trying to ape some like boomer or even
Yeah.
older than
That's
that that
exactly it.
that feeling. And I'm thinking like, yeah, you ate ramen at one time, and the idea was to eat ramen now, so you get a good job, or you graduate, you get a good
Exactly.
job, you get married, you get a family, you get a nice house, so you'll never have to eat ramen ever again. The
Right.
problem is my generation is now turning 40, and they're still eating ramen, and not by choice, not just because they're going to some fancy restaurant that serves ramen with chopsticks or something. So we saw my generation saw the rug pull happen, but they didn't feel it right away. Your
Yes.
generation, it seems like Gen Z, and you have the right idea, is that you saw this rug pull coming from a mile away, and you said, you know what, there's no use in just giving into it. You got to start finding a way to fight back against it.
Right. Yes, I think that's exactly right. I have quite a bit of sympathy for that millennial rug pull, as you're referring to it as, because what is fundamental in just about everything, but certainly with the maintenance of society, is this ability to bargain with the future, and to delay your gratification for long term prosperity, and that is essentially the deal, right? Of reality, but also of society as a whole. Like, if your practice or your training does not amount to anything, then why on earth would you?
I think you got muted here for a second.
Oh,
Yeah, there you go.
if you're going to the gym and you are kicking your ass the entire time. You're training as hard as you can, and you're following a really strict diet, and you're still fat and out of shape. Like at some point, you're going to be like, well, maybe I just don't need to train then if I'm not getting the outcome that I'm kind of bargaining for here. And I think that you're right. We have, and I'm on the older end of Gen Z, but we have, many of us have recognized that we're reanalyzing the trade because it doesn't make sense anymore to pay those dues if you're not going to receive the other side of that agreement. That's not to say that all of a sudden you just get to go out and live hedonically and frivolously, but the point more so is like to try and pursue what was once claimed to be as the American dream does not make sense now. So, reanalyze your distribution of resources, that being your time, effort, money, all the, your youth, even all the above. Like we have to reevaluate the deal essentially. And I see that too. Crenshaw's tweet in particular was quite infuriating to me because that, there's no recognition about the change in conditions at all. And even this sophistry and the attempt to kind of reframe and say, well, I can actually go to the store and buy a 10-pack of tortillas. It's like, fine, but the argument was never, are we going to starve or not? The argument is, have the conditions of living changed in the last 15 to 40 years drastically enough to affect the average person's way of life? And the answer is obviously yes. And another guy I'm a big fan of, Dave Green, he explained, if these people were being honest, they would say there happened to be a time in history at the advent of, from when capitalism shifted to managerialism, that allowed for, abundance in the Western world, to allow for people to have, marginally priced meals a few times a week, like a fast food burrito. That time is unfortunately going away now as a result either of bad policy or maybe just the contradictions that play out in an ideology that didn't fare as well as they thought it would. Either way, that concession determines honesty. And we don't get that concession. So what does it tell you? That these people are being fundamentally dishonest. And the call is not for, like, we demand, this certain standard of living because we are owed it. What we're saying is that was a staple of the society that we lived in. And that's an outgrowth of basically our representation as a people. That is the society we were able to produce. And that is one of the runoff benefits of being in that society. If that society can no longer produce it, well, maybe we should take a look at why it can no longer produce it and try and correct it. And yet, what do we get? Vitriolic. Yeah. That's it. Shut the hell
and
up.
and I love your response from about a week ago about Ben Shapiro by saying like, oh, well, tacos cost $4.50 a Del Taco, and people are as fat as they were. If only our ancestors could see how fat we are. I'm going, yeah, you know what? That's not the right answer. Because the whole $20 burrito thing was not about burritos costing $20. The only time a burrito will really cost $20 if you're in a very trendy restaurant and then you get guacamole and you get extra meat, or it's delivered with DoorDash plus tip. It's not about a $20 burrito. It's the idea, or it's the affordability angle that a Chipotle burrito once cost $5.95 for chicken burrito. I got it last week. It's 11 something dollars, and I didn't get all the fixins involved in it.
Yep.
It's people are being crushed because everything has exploded when it comes to the amount things cost, and yet I just see a lot of people in these meaningless communications jobs making 40 grand a year. Then they got to get a second job, so they don't have time to come home and cook a really nice meal, go to Aldi and get their tortilla shells and spread the meat over with beans, like the Joel Berry or whatever that moron was saying. That they don't have time because they're going from one job to the next. So yeah, I don't have time to cook. I have to drive through somewhere and get something. So that's not so much a decadent society. It's out of convenience in many ways. And then, of course, the people who are thumbing their nose at that are ones that probably have a housemaid who can come over and make some
Right.
food, or they make enough money with their either government job or Hasbara propaganda job that their wife can stay home with their 5 kids and make all the meals. So it's just all of this is a deliberate misrepresentation,
Yes.
and just everybody's so out of touch. And then just to chalk it up, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, you're lazy, you just want things handed to you, you want lattes and avocado toast. I'm just going, you know what? I can't even be bothered talking to you if that's the way you are coming at this topic of conversation.
Absolutely. Another element that I think goes undiscussed in these conversations generally is basically the liberal world order primarily promised to us material prosperity, and at the expense, which wasn't advertised but was a result of it, at the expense really of our bonds of heritage. And that could be applied in many regards, whether it's like, a small community, whether it's literally family, whether it's your own family, having a spouse and children, whatever. Basically, the trade was, we're going to globalize the world. We're going to basically we're going to corporatize existence. And as a result, you're going to have the material benefit to allow you to go do things like go to Chipotle and pick up an affordable burrito. And now what you're seeing is and this is to be expected and was predicted by many, but we are now losing both ends of that deal. And as you see, so many of our especially the younger generations, so many of our complaints about life are a result of these things being torn away and that were unaccounted for as necessary to the fulfillment of the human condition. And as you do that, it's like, you're an alcoholic going through withdrawals. It's like, yeah, it's miserable, so at least give me that whiskey in the morning that takes that away for a little bit. It's like, no, now you get to sit through eternal withdrawals and you don't get your hair of the dog for the day. And I think that is what drives me the most crazy. Is it's a blatant, it's not just a disregard for conditions, but it's all. And oh, whoops, did you
No,
lose me
you're
there?
good. You paused for a second,
Okay.
so I paused it there.
Oh,
Go for it. Keep going.
um, basically, my point is that we are losing out on so many of the things that basically the ancient world. Did you lose me
No,
again?
I still got you.
Okay, it's saying I've like low bandwidth. Sorry. Um, yeah, basically, if we continue to lose out on really the spiritual conditions that we need, and then also do not get the material conditions we need, these are the types of things that incite, revolt when you really have nothing to lose. And I think that they are accounting for that and have accounted for that in many, many ways. But what is so, I can't necessarily identify what is the driving factor for the Jeremy Borings, the Joel Berrys. I obviously understand the Ben Shapiro drive, but for the Rod Dreyers, these types of conservatives that do seem to believe what they say in some regard. And I think if I had to make a firm conclusion, I think that they are so interested in sounding virtuous. I mean, it's kind of the San Francisco Beautiful Losers idea, but they really are so hopeful to seem like a good person that they will just disregard the reality and they will double down on the either the true nature of things or on some like false liberal principle. Like I saw the other day, J.K. Rowling called out the guy who I think exposed the Jason Arday controversy, the Cambridge black professor, and she said like, I can't remember his name. It's like Kofnas or something.
Kofi, something, yeah.
Yeah, he's a racist, no doubt about it. And then whatever, like she went on to basically stand upon that altar of moral superiority by diminishing him as a racist. And his response is, I'm applying race realism in the same exact way that you apply sex realism to conclude your transgender stance, but they can never break, because people don't operate, in a rational standpoint, obviously a mistake of the Enlightenment presumptions. But the point being is that like that type of mindset is what you see pervade the Borings, the Berries, where they can kind of break through the absurdity of the left, but they can never come to terms with the reality of the right and of nature. And because they want to maintain themselves in the parameters of like polite discourse, they will refrain from breaking that third wall and instead stop right at the line and say, you know what? I want to be seen as the guy who's telling people don't be a victim and work hard rather than actually engage with the reality of the problem. And they think that they can bask in kind of that reward of being like, he's so furiously hardworking that he's incapable of perceiving any sort of structural failure or injustice around him. And look at the effect that he's having on other, people in society, particularly young people, by telling them, never consider yourself a victim. Now I understand that. I understand like avoiding the perennial victim mindset, but that doesn't preclude dealing with the reality of situations, which they refuse to do in every regard.
Yeah, well, it's when you mentioned Jeremy Boring, Joel Berry, Seth Dillon, Rod Dreher, James Lindsay, all these people basically you could say that, oh, well, James Lindsay's actually a liberal, but
Yeah.
he wrote this thesis and he changed some words for DEI purposes. And then you have Jeremy Boring, who at one time ran a pseudo conservative online network and podcasting and movies, I guess. But they all agree on the major tenets, which is that post-war consensus, and it's to preserve that time of the rise of the neocons. That's why you always hear about 90s nostalgia when I mention about Blockbuster, and it almost seems like that's a way of one-shotting generations into not understanding the world that's around them. And when you talk to
Yeah.
Gen Z, and I know you covered it in your book, and you talk about it on your show that Gen Z, you get a lot of these people who are what they call groypers. They have people who are like, I talked to my cousin who's 25, and if I bring up a certain country in the Middle East, I'm going to hear everything. I'm going to hear
Mhm.
stuff that sounded a couple of years ago like Fed posting. But that's what that generation is. They are
Yeah.
to me, just anecdotally, but I think there's, what's plural of anecdote is data. And you're starting to see this rise. I don't want to say rise of necessarily white identitarianism, but I am seeing people who are a little bit more nationalistic, and which I think is a
Yeah.
good thing instead of this preserving the post 1945 worldview, and then we're hearing about terms like post liberalism and all this other stuff that's going on right now. And it just seems that, especially what we've seen in the behavior since the assassination of Charlie Kirk nearly a year ago, is that the point of Seth Dillon and Joel Berry and James Lindsay and Jeremy Boring and Ben Shapiro is to not crush the left, crush your enemies,
Of
punish your
course.
enemies. It's to continue gatekeeping the right.
Yes. That's exactly right. And it's become very obvious. I guess it's difficult for me to tell because I'm so siloed in many ways. I mean, very often some obvious conclusions. I think that something like the mythology of World War II did not happen in the way that we were told. Like for many people to even hear that is like genuinely blasphemy. To say something like democracy is obviously not um, a beneficial form of government just based on the incentive structure. The most people can't even listen to that. And to me, like that's essentially common sense at this point. And you do see that's a big difference between the right and the left is that the left patronizes the radicals, and the mainstream right, I guess is what I'm referring to it as, the people that you mentioned, their job is to destroy them basically. And that is their job. It's not an organic manifestation of their beliefs. That is their to-do list. And what you find, I wrote about this in the first chapter of my book, basically, is that these people will never engage with the arguments. I saw a great clip from Aaron McIntyre the other day where I can't remember what the initial question was, but he said, "Look, we've had the evidence for years, guys. Like the bell curve was written in the 90s. Like we've known this stuff for a long time, and the alt-right basically came to the table thinking, if I just give you the facts and evidence." I interviewed Jared Taylor. He said the same exact thing. He said that when he began, he thought, I just need to put a decent face to these ideas. And because they're obviously true, it will gain abundant traction and become the dominant political theory. And he was like, in my, hubris and arrogance, I was obviously humbled. But that makes you have to reframe what you understand politics to be, which really is, I mean, besides being the natural manifestation of the people themselves, but it's sentiment and it's mythology and it's a story. And which is really what I tried to do in my book, and maybe I failed in a few places, but I wanted to create what I viewed as the founding mythology of the basically Gen Z new right. Because and a lot of people get on me, and I think it's kind of bizarre, but they think that when I talk in ways that, like, how we experience something, that it excludes like millennials or Gen X or anything. It's like, obviously that's not the case. It's that these things happened in our formative years. Like, to go to college during the Trump era and even during the George Floyd era, like, I remember my class the day after George Floyd or whatever talking about like critical race theory in that regard. My point in saying that is that these things are not contained to a singular generation, but they are contained through a certain lens of that generation. And when you can tell a story that resonates with people on a visceral level, because what always interests me is, like, whenever I'm reading a book, that I really love, where like I genuinely want to get to the next line. It's like, what separates that from any other book? And it's obviously the strength of the idea behind it, whether it's the story itself. Like, if you read somebody's biography that you're really interested in, it doesn't really matter the prose of the person. Like, you're just trying to figure out, oh, what was he doing when he was 15 years old, right? Like, that's what's compelling and interesting. And if you apply kind of the same thing to politics, and you get away from this concept of, like, if I just break down the data, that's going to be compelling enough. No, you have to, I mean, you have to bind it to reality to a degree, but you got to sell a message, that is directional toward where you want to go. But this idea that the masses are capable of, interpreting things from a deep level, I mean, this is just obviously not true. And the whole, like, flattening of America, which I don't think it was egalitarian in nature. I think that's been a corruption. But regardless, that flattening kind of presumes that there is obviously this universal man at the core of it, that's like almost like the invisible hand of the market, like the invisible mind of the masses, right? And
Mhm.
and that's just so obviously not true. And then we kind of have to refamiliarize ourselves with the idea of social hierarchy and really aristocracy to a degree. And I think that's what I don't know if this movement will be successful in by the metrics, but if it is, it will at least reframe how we understand politics in a way that the old thinkers like the Burnhams and Sam Francis weren't able to do in their time. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Well, I mean, some great, and then you see the people who kind of helped try to pave that way. You get Joe Sobran, Pat
Yep.
Buchanan, that some of these great minds that were just ahead of their time. I mean,
Yep.
right now, next to me right now, I've got Suicide of a Superpower, Pat Buchanan. I've got some other books I'm not going to show. Culture of Critique, Kevin McDonald, um, but there's a lot of people who've been trying to pave that way, but I think we call it now trying to red pill the normies, and
Yep.
a lot of times it's not going to work. But the good news, unlike for my generation when we were 18, we didn't. There was an internet, but it wasn't what it is now. And certainly Twitter, which is now X, you can basically say whatever you want as long as you're not having death threats.
Yeah. Yeah.
X is I gotta say, as much as that, I know not everyone's into what Elon does and some of the other stuff or whatever his plan going forward. The fact that these ideas and things that I see on X right now that are being played out and being shared and reshared, I never would have thought even 5 years ago
Oh
would have been
no, yeah.
able to get out there. The fact that Dan Bilzerian is putting out videos about calling Randy Fine a Jew and goy slop and all
Yeah,
that
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
stuff, never would have
I
thought just a
agree.
couple of years ago that this stuff would be out
I
there.
agree.
But it is. How do you maintain that? And that's where you get the school marms like Jeremy Boring trying to scold everybody on this. And I'm thinking, you're the old media. I just saw a clip from, I think, maybe 2 weeks ago. It was Bill O'Reilly interviewing Ben Shapiro. And I'm thinking, that right there is old media now. We are in a new generation. And if you
Yeah.
took away a Nick Fuentes, the people who are groypers are not going to say, well, I guess I'm just going to go watch Fox News again. No, they're going to
Right.
find somebody who's
Right.
even more radical than Nick Fuentes. So I wanted to ask you about how Gen Z, because I've heard this trope. I don't know if it's true, it could be a stereotype or whatever, but that you get a lot of Gen Z are either, lopping their genitals off and being trans, or they're, goose stepping. Is it,
Right.
have you seen that radicalism? And are there still Gen Z moderates, or does that not even exist anymore?
It's a little bit hard for me to say definitively. I like I said, I really am on the older end of Gen Z. I would say that the core of Gen Z right now is like between 21 and 23. Like that's really where the staple is. From what I've seen, and I would imagine you've had similar experiences from a millennial's perspective, is the women are basically just a lost cause,
That
especially
was
in
my
the
that was my
cities.
next question I wanted to
Yeah.
ask you about, but keep it going.
Yeah, and but as so far as the guys go, I mean, I guess I'm a little bit insulated in terms of the guys that I know, but almost every dude I know at this point is right wing, even like non-whites, and I think
Oh, because the Democrat Party is just so feminine coded.
it's yes,
If
yes,
you see it, like I have a bunch of friends who are Democrats, and like they're married to women, and yet I just see that they're, probably gonna piss a couple of them off, but they don't wear the pants. The wife wears the
oh,
pants in the
totally,
family,
totally, totally,
full on
totally,
cuck chair type of
yeah, yeah. Mhm.
energy,
My
and
wife's boyfriend stuff, yeah,
yeah, exactly. And I just see that whenever I see a guy, especially a guy who's under
yeah,
40 or 50
it's
that's
crazy.
voting Democrat, I'm just thinking like, dude, who's the other guy that you're bringing over on Saturday
Yeah,
night?
yeah. You gotta you are at that in those instances at this point, you kind of got to wonder like what the real game is for them there. Like, are they just too cucked out to their wife to disagree, or are they just so brainwashed? I mean, because we also have to remember, I think our generations in particular, perhaps not X and above. Um, I think I don't know if you're aware of Homath, but he talks about this type
Oh
of
yeah.
thing. Yeah, I love that guy. But he explains that like we really were taught that the way to be a man and to get the girl is to like just be effeminate and weak, right, and deferential, and you do have to break out of that programming, which is why I codified this in the book. Like Andrew Tate's rise was a net positive because he at least broke people out of those constraints of like, oh, maybe it's not the best thing to be just like some Dean Withers weak wimp. Um and but I guess to explain more deeply the trend in Gen Z, we have a lot more true radicals, and it's hard to even use that word because from a relative perspective, we're radical to the liberal order, but in reality, the liberal order is radical to reality and to all preceding politics. So many of our beliefs are just a reaffirmation of like what people thought in the 1900s or whatever, yeah, 1890s. And we have such a weird understanding of time as we think that progress is indefinite and always trending toward like utopia. But I would say that people recently have been trying to refute the point of like base Gen Z, and it's like, yeah, I don't think that it's like we have 60% that are national socialists or anything, but the ones that we do have are extremely, I would say, impressive, and they know what they're talking about, and they hold their beliefs to a much higher degree than like your average right wing Gen X or millennial. And another thing that I think distinguishes the two at this point is there's a reflex, like I said, with those kind of conservatives like the Rod Dreyers. There's a reflex for many in Gen X or maybe millennials that see the problem, but when they get faced with like, okay, so then we need to do 100 million deportations, right? Then they back off. They go,
Yeah.
well, or okay, then maybe we need to take into account the reality that ethnic identity is very important in the functionality of a system. To what degree and to what percentage, maybe we don't know. We can hash that out. But they just actually, I don't want to talk about that at all. And it's like, but if you, and this is one of my big problems with Tucker and those in kind of that sphere, is if you're going to call the problem out, it kind of and you do it correctly, it implies that you have a correct diagnosis of the situation. And if you have a correct diagnosis of the situation, which I think many of those people do, and you're unwilling to prescribe the proper prescription, then I'm sorry, you're of no use, because that's a twofold equation. In order to fix this, we have to diagnose it correctly,
Yeah.
and we have to write the correct prescription. And so many people that were former disaffected liberals, Brett Weinstein comes to mind, who I do respect. I think he's a good man, but he will start to identify the problem, but then he's too uncomfortable to get away from his liberal priors to actually reckon with the solution. And I think one thing that Gen Z does that's a little bit distinct as well is we seem to be post-ideological. I certainly feel this myself, and Jay Burden agreed when me and him spoke about it, is like, I don't actually care what the right economic policy is for prosperity. I just want the prosperity.
Yeah.
And like, whereas many people, especially on the left, because leftism is fundamentally, feminine, and it operates through second order effects, right? Like whatever they're, if they say they want economic equality, but it's actually this like vitriolic hatred of excess and wealth and really people they're jealous of, right? But regardless, my point is that I'm actually able to say, like, while I do definitely consider myself like a white identitarian, I think that I think that's a necessity. I think everyone has to have, this kind of ethnic solidarity with their own. That doesn't create animosity towards others. But my point is that's not to say that now we got to start making a racial hierarchy and chopping people up that don't fit, our demographic. But what it is to say is there is probably a number at which a societal demographic layout becomes untenable and just devolves into ethnic tribal warfare. Whether that's, 80%, it could be Japanese, doesn't have to be white, right? Like it could be 80% Japanese, it could be 70%. There is a number where it becomes, okay, 20%, 20%, 20%, 20%, 20%. They're just basically reinventing nations by first principles as their enclaves expand and border up against each other, right? And so we have to come to terms with these realities because they are realities. And the problem is they violate liberal principles. And you have
Yeah.
someone like Tucker, Brett, whoever, that will
Mike
not at the
Cernovich
end
is
of the day,
another one.
yeah, they will not at the end of the day say, okay, this is the reality. And I think that post-ideological clarity is what allows some of us, and hopefully this isn't presumptive, but it allows some of us to say, like, we can actually look at it from a real, a kind of unburdened lens and say, like, what is the best thing? If we define best properly, right? Because we don't even all have the same definitions of things like good and bad. And we have to get that straight first and then have someone that's able to kind of steer the ship in that direction without being like, well, I really want to make sure that, you're applying some form of like Marxist or Keynesian economics that it just doesn't work. But because there's like that sentimental mythological pull to it, they're unable to relinquish that. I don't think we have that on the Gen Z side.
Yeah, it's the heterodox views that at one time I'm a Republican, I'm a conservative, therefore I believe in this, this, and this. And that's
Yeah.
what liberalism is.
Yeah.
It's I
Yep. Yep.
believe in this, but you cannot be a liberal and say, like, I believe in a woman's right to choose and I believe transgenderism, but then you also believe that maybe it is a good idea to protect ourselves with the Second Amendment. Then you're out, you're gone.
Yep.
And I've
Correct.
noticed this with Gen Z, especially when it comes to right wing Gen Z, is that, yeah, they're not married to capitalism. You could say, yeah, I want 100 million deportations. Yeah, I think we need to actually start cracking skulls and cracking down on the quote unquote teen takeovers. Yet at the same time, I can be anti data center and I can be anti flock
Yeah.
camera. And at one time, and like I'm already noticing the school marmory of Barry Weiss and Ben Shapiro saying, actually, flock cameras are a good thing. I'm going,
Right.
yeah, you know what, this stuff that doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's interesting about Con Inc., why the Daily Wire lost like 80% of their subscriptions, and why Breitbart, no one really cares about that, or Newsmax and these other publications that have come around in the last 20 years, is that we're not falling for it anymore. That especially Gen Z, they see it. They see the man behind the curtain right now, and you're not going back. You can try to gatekeep all you want, but it's not going to work out well in your favor. And that's why I can't stand the people who consider themselves to be conservative trying to scold other right wingers for being right wing, for caring about, I don't know, preserving some type of ethnic cohesion in Christendom.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand why they feel that way, but I don't. That's why I have a lot of hope, a lot of white pills for Gen Z right now. At
Yeah,
least
I
Gen Z males, because I do want to get into the woman question here.
definitely. I think that what we're also breaking from is this obsession with universalism. And I don't mean that from like a moral perspective, but what you'll notice is a lot of people in the political realm are waiting for a hypocritical moment to like expose somebody, right? Like shouldn't the liberals be happy that Florida's going to have a black governor? And it's like, yeah, but that's not how this works at all, right? And with that same presumption, like if you apply that to many things, the flock camera is a good example where people will say, well, you have a cell phone, right? You have a cell phone, therefore you should be in favor of flock cameras because you're already being surveilled 24/7. It's like, guess what? I don't need to bind every single decision I make to the broad implications of a lesser decision I make. Like just because I do, and we're by nature hypocritical people. Like if we're unable to apply some other position to something else because it's violated in what we've done before, like then we might as well just kill ourselves because nothing will ever make like symbiotic sense. And but we are getting away from a policy perspective. Like we have to justify every single little thing through the lens of, well, my consistency on the matter of X, it applies directly to Y and Z. Therefore, it's a sufficient take. It's like we can actually just say, like a good father would to their, stubborn child, because I said so. That's what I think in this situation. That's how I want to apply it because I think that in the long term goes to the betterment of society. I don't need to justify the last 30 years of my opinions to make that case.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of the older conservatives are obsessed with this track record. And it's like, guess what? You can be wrong and you can adjust. And that is not invalidating of your larger ideology.
Yeah, look, when I was 15 years old, we went to war. We started the GWAT wars. I don't agree with my 15-year-old self. You know why? Because I was handed data. I researched it, realized it wasn't worth it, worth the lives, worth the money, worth the strife that's put our. So you change. But yeah, there is
Yeah.
that feeling, and especially in conservative circles, of always trying to be consistent and not
Yeah.
admitting that you were wrong. But that's what I like about what Gen Z men are doing now, is that they acknowledge the problem exists instead of ignoring that it exists in the first place and going forward. But talking about women, so the day we're recording this, there's this whole trial that's happening with Lindsay Clancy, this woman who had psychotic break during her third after her third pregnancy. It wasn't even postpartum depression; it was postpartum psychosis, I believe, and she sent her husband away to run errands, and then she brought her kids into the basement or something and just started strangling them with an exercise band. Apparently came to, or whatever, realized what she did. She tried jumping out of a window and committing suicide. So now you are seeing, I can understand maybe not having her charged with first degree murder, that she was on a break or whatever drugs she was being prescribed caused her to feel this way. But the problem now is you go through TikTok and you're seeing the amount of Lindsay did nothing wrong. I identify with Lindsay. Who's to say that if I were in that situation that I wouldn't have done the same thing? And I'm just looking at this going, wow, we are in crazy town. At the same time, you have Nancy Mace getting a bunch of tattoos, and you have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who very well could be the next president of the United States,
Yep.
separating from her possible gay ex-fiance and freezing her eggs. So
Yeah.
it's easy for, Fox News watching boomer conservatives to just go, they're crazy, whatever. It's just,
Yeah.
they're maybe on their period or something. And it's like, no, you're not reading the room, because if you properly read the room, you would realize 4 years ago there wasn't this red tsunami. It was maybe a red trickle of water
Right.
because women voted as one issue voters. They voted with their uterus. And they said, even conservative girl bosses were like, yeah, but still think it's right for a woman's right to choose. It
Exactly.
became a voting block. And now the data is out there that women, especially not, I would say from Gen X all the way down to Gen Alpha, are way liberal, like way progressive. And it's not only causing a rift in the politics of the matter, but it's also causing a rift in how men and women try to get together and get date
Yes.
and get engaged, get married, and start a family. Because it was one thing if you are someone who voted for Johnson and your husband voted for Barry Goldwater in 1964. And you could still make it work where you maybe have a little bit of political differences. But now it's to the point where it's values. And if you're a right wing Gen Zer who believes that a baby is born through conception and not a clump of cells that you can murder up until the point of birth, that does not go with your values, and therefore it's
Right.
not compatible. It's not going to work. So I wanted to ask you about Gen Z women. How do you find some kind of compromise? Do you compromise? And what needs to be done in order for us to remedy this situation, if there is a remedy?
I don't think that there's an immediate remedy for the current faction of mating age men and women. So I would say between like 20 and 40. Um, Women basically only respect, well, their opinions derive from whatever entity they most respect. So whether it's their boyfriend, husband, whether it's their father, or basically societal institutions at large, whatever reigns supreme in their hierarchy of power is where that they essentially derive their opinions from. Obviously, that they have a predisposition toward the herd opinion, but the herd opinion is basically the extension of whatever the dominant institution is. And so the best individual advice is to try and find one of the few that align with you, and your value system to the best degree possible. And if you can't, be somebody that is, this is obviously like tough advice to play out, but like be somebody that is respectable enough to convince otherwise. Because if they don't respect you, they're never going to take upon your worldview. It's just never going to happen. But uh, seeing what I've been seeing, I haven't actually followed the Clancy story very deeply, besides like the Matt Walsh tweets. But I'm well aware of the broad details. And you got to really look at what a lot of women do as a feign toward some type of other reaction. And what we've also seen in many instances is like a lot of the most riotous leftist women are actually like deriving pleasure from being slammed against the ground by like some strong cop. Like they aren't doing things in the A to B sequence that I think men would operate in. um and that's just important to understand from a operating logic perspective, like when you're seeing these types of things. So I think a lot of that, like what you were seeing like on TikTok, where they're talking about like, oh, I would do this too. It's almost like you're shit testing society and saying, can I say this without anybody standing up to me and putting me back in my place? But it's become very, very obvious, especially in the last 5 years, that women should not be engaged in the political realm.
Oh, yeah,
And and
absolutely.
and it's, and I, again, another thing that I can't even believe is controversial, but that's also to say, like, again, when you make these types of statements, the initial reaction from most women is something like, well, what about all the idiot men out there? Are you saying that I'm now subordinate to them? And it's like, no, what we're saying is just like in the distribution of IQ bell curve, um, you're the reason you have the genius men is because you have the tail end idiot men. But that is also to conclude that like even the best tail end women is not going to beat the best tail end men. So you have to siphon off from that top echelon. And and I mean, like most men shouldn't be politically involved, right? Like it's just like from the cream of the crop or the cream of the pie, as Candace Owens like to say. Um, you need to take from that top echelon in any regard. And the I think you can actually disenfranchise women out of politics. It may not be in this generation, but you again, like I was saying with political sentiment, you have to sell the message. You have to sell the mythology. I mean, many of those who I think the split on women's suffrage was like 90% women against, 10% for. Something like that. I don't know if that's when it came out when the official vote came, but that was the broad consensus at the time. And most of the arguments made were by women saying that we don't want to involve ourselves in this basically nasty realm. We want to be subjugated in a beneficial way, to the home where our responsibilities are removed, because there's a benefit to having your responsibilities removed. There is a benefit to being the laborer who knows that if he works 8 hours a day, he will get that paycheck with that fixed rate, and he doesn't have to worry about the profitability of the project he's on. There's a benefit to that, which we like to just exclude entirely. But the biggest thing with women, and this is again basically unobjectionable, is this concept, and Fuentes talks about this quite a bit, and I think he's the most succinct on the matter. They want the responsibility without the authority. And you see that in basically every single regard, and it's exemplified very well in this this Clancy situation, where now that she's being held to account for her actions, they want to reduce her agency to that of like a lunatic child, and remove any ability to assert responsibility on her actions. And that is the fundamental problem. You do not get these responsibilities without I'm sorry, you do not get afforded the freedom, agency that you have been given without the corresponding responsibility. Jordan Peterson talked about this many, many years ago. He wouldn't go as far as this, of course, but it's derivative of the same message. And that is what we have to come to terms with. And I think you can sell, just like I explained the laborer, like there is a benefit to not being the business owner. Yeah, you may not make the profit from the risk, but at least you don't have to worry about the risk. You get to go home and just like hang out and know that tomorrow you're going to come to work and make a fixed rate. Not saying that all of a sudden defends capitalism in every single regard, but it is to say that there are trade-offs that we're not even acknowledging. And removing the women from the political does a lot of that at the same time. But what's also most important is that if you exchange the dominant social hegemony, if you were to turn America into a explicitly right-wing place, with many different iterations making that the case, the next generation of women all become staunchly right-wing, because either the men are, which you're predisposed to, or your schools are, or your media is, your churches is. And this is what all the leftists and communists understood over the course of the last century, is if you exchange that, like an Indiana Jones swapping out the treasure, like that's it, game over. And you might have some bratty I do feel some empathy for the women of Gen Z and the millennial generation, because you can't turn back the clock once you turn 40, 45. And they're going to keep doubling down, just like a mother who, greenlit the trans surgery for their son is going to have to keep doubling down, because otherwise she mutilated her child. You're going to see the same thing. You're not going to see these people, just like I was talking about the hypocrisy thing. You're not going to see these people come to the table and say, oops, I was wrong. Just like you're not going to see a scientist when he's in his 70s, 80s that sees like a younger scientist disprove his life's work come and go, I was wrong. This guy's brilliant. He outshined me. Like it's not how people work. But we have to
Well,
be
yeah.
aware that is the operating system underneath it,
Well, it's kind of like when there's all these studies that say that Gen Z doesn't drink anymore. Now
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
it's a little bit of a misnomer because Gen Z is also doing a lot of,
totally,
vaping and
totally.
edibles and all that kind of stuff. But one thing is, I think there is a faction of Gen Z who does look at it because they're products of divorced parents because dad's a drinker and dad cheated on his wife with the secretary, or mom's a drinker and had the pool boy over, or whatever the case was, that they were raised in this time where they saw that previous generation. They say, I don't want to be like that. So
Yes.
possibly you can see maybe Gen Alpha looks at millennials and Gen X at this point and saying, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be
Yeah.
like maybe the women. And maybe it's going to take, and I don't care if I get flagged on YouTube for saying this, but we're going to see a rash of suicides among
Oh
older
yes. Oh
millennial
yes.
women if it's not already happening.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's certainly the case. Or if it's not explicit suicide, it's some type of degeneration into a life that's like barely livable. Um, but no, I think that's totally true. I think another thing that is beneficial about the Gen Alpha rise will be that the men are not, and this is a direct result of guys like Tate coming onto the mainstream, is that the natural proclivities of the men are not going to be some like soy boy dork from a romantic comedy that gets pushed into the locker. Like I feel like the Peter Parker archetype is what the Gen Z millennials like saw themselves as, like the ideal guy is like this like kind of weak wimp who like somehow assumes power in a non-orthodox way. Um and
That was like a Woody Allen. That was definitely a 1950s, 1960s version of the feminization culminating with the Revenge of the Nerds and that kind
yeah,
of stuff
yeah,
of like, oh,
exactly.
no, no, actually the good guy is the geeky one. And then it turns out that's not the case. It's never
Right.
really been.
And it's like because you're geeky, that endows you with goodness and that you deserve to win in the end. So you will get your power, fame, whatever, but you'll do it non-exploitatively, therefore it will be good. And that everyone's just kind of waiting for that moment, right? Like when are people going to recognize me for my harmless innocence and my goodwill? And it's like, well, you gotta exert, you know, power. That's just what you have to do. And I think a lot of the younger guys, and I see it in Gen Z, of course, but it's a transition because we weren't raised, like when I maybe they're just bait, but when I read the Reddit stories of like some teachers being like, all my 14-year-olds, like they just talk about Tate and question the legitimacy of a certain event in history. And it's like, it's really funny. I hope it's true. I think it is true to a degree, but what you'll see is that then the alpha males in that demographic will have the leverage over the women, and then the women will naturally adapt to conform to that. Whereas you don't see that right now. And again, I don't know if that can be reconciled. I hope so, but I don't know. I just think that the most important thing at the moment is to kind of disregard it and look at it more as like kind of a an odyssey through, hopefully try and get to a beneficial place at the end, because we know, I mean, one thing that's important to understand is most people never get their flowers like during their time. Like very few people in any regard. There are some, but of course not many. Whether, whether they were a CEO, an artist, it doesn't matter. Most people are remembered through history in the lens that they're remembered through, but very rarely are they in the moment seen as like this, prophetic great figure. I think even back to many of the like right wing figures that I look up to in history, like I can't imagine any of them ever got recognized a single time outside of like a conference or something like that. But we look at them as like these great minds, which they are. But and a lot of people are foundational building blocks to the ascension of one of those people down the line, right? Like you're you have to be willing to play a part in the story that isn't the main character. And I think everyone kind of is so devoted to that. And they're like, if I can't be the next guy, then I shouldn't play. And I think that's a direct result probably of kind of the social media induced narcissism. But I really want to hammer that point is like, there is extreme value and necessity in these like prefigurement people, that allows something to come after them. And it's not all for nothing. I think the Fishback The Fishback Lost is a good example of that, where he he undoubtedly shifted the Overton window for acceptable discourse in running for a significant political office. That's valuable. That is extremely valuable. But most people would never do that because they don't want to get tagged as a loser or something like that. Like, and which tells you that they're not really interested in actual change. They're interested in
Yeah.
ego.
Yeah. Well, it's I keep going back to Daryl Cooper, and
Yep.
2 years ago he was on Tucker's show and he was questioning or talking about Churchill, that he wasn't the great hero,
Exactly.
and I that's the one interesting thing because you mentioned about Tucker. Because I don't want to counter signal someone like him because he's not going to be the guy that's
Yeah.
out there, doing what someone like Nick Fuentes is and pointing his finger and naming the J or whatever. But he is kind of guiding the people who were in that malaise of Fox News boomerdom for such a long
Yes.
time that he's like, well, no, I like this Tucker guy. And then Tucker has a guest on that says, maybe Churchill wasn't the hero that you think he is. And it gets a lot of the people going, maybe there are other things I was lied about. Maybe I should do some a little more research. And then just a couple of weeks ago, Daryl's back on Tucker and says
Yep.
one of the most fascinating things that it's almost like an offshoot of what we heard from Jordan Peterson 10 years ago, but even taking it even further is living historically. And I think that's what's interesting is I don't know if the baby boomer generation lived historically. I think they lived for themselves. They lived for the moment. Um, Certainly Gen X and then millennials, but I think this is an opportunity for someone like you and people of that generation that they are looking at things and trying to do things and live historically, realize what our purpose is going forward. What can
Right.
I do? What can I read? Uh, the activism, not so much caring about who the president is. You notice we haven't even talked about Trump or anything like that.
Yeah.
We're talking about things that actually matter, building your community, whether you're joining like the old Glory Club or John Birch Society, or you're doing things. Who is your neighbor? Do you know who your
Right.
neighbor is? Go over there, shake his hand. Let him borrow your lawnmower for the afternoon. That kind of stuff is what that coalition building is what's more important than sitting around in November wondering who the president is. And that's what I think Gen Z, especially Gen Z men, I'm very hopeful for. And I like what I'm seeing so far. And I hope that continues. And I hope that my cringe generation can also start to learn a thing or two about from the younger people. That's what I say in this podcast all the time. You need to listen to the concerns of younger people. Don't just write them off. Don't just say
Yeah.
avocado toast. Go, why are they complaining about this stuff? Uh, uh, do some of them have be handed everything in their life? Like Caroline Levitt, who's
Yeah.
married to a 60-something-year-old man and telling
Unbelievable.
everyone they're lazy. And it's like, I don't know. I think Gen Z's has the right idea, and that they're, by the way, you're not allowed to read Carl Schmidt. I don't know if you heard
Yeah.
that. It's breaking
Oh,
news.
I did. I did. Yeah.
It's
No,
like,
I
it's just so funny.
absolutely. I agree. And I didn't, it's an interesting concept about like the counter signaling thing because I agree with you. I mean, someone like replied to my tweet about Andrew because I just cannot stand Andrew Wilson. I think he's
Oh,
a
he's
total,
terrible.
yeah. And somebody was like, well, what do you get out of counter signaling someone? It's like, well, isn't he counter signaling Candace by wanting to do that debate already? Like, what are we talking about here? But the point more so is I think counter signaling, like if I were to just all of a sudden go after somebody because I didn't like them, that's one thing. But if somebody's proposing uh, an invalid option, like I think Tucker does good work in, and I think he knows a lot more than he lets on, of course.
He plays the
But
wasp shtick, as they
for
say.
sure, but I still do not think it benefits anybody to do a video like "It's Time to Save America," where he just reinforces liberal platitudes. And so I think it's fair to critique that and say, if you're doing what I think you're doing, which is leading people with breadcrumbs toward this kind of post-liberal world, you can't reaffirm the liberal world in the meantime. Just abstain from it. Don't talk about it. Don't mention democracy, whatever. Because when you start reinforcing those things, it confuses the broad coalition as a whole. And another thing with in regard to like the idea of counter signaling, which I think is an important distinction, is most people what they mean by that, because as you know, the Rod Dreher faction, Jeremy Boring, that's what they say about everybody on the dissident right. And what it actually means is submit to my imposition
Correct.
and follow what I'm saying. What you're gonna critique Israel? What are you trying to cost Trump the election? It's like, no, actually, that's a fundamental, basically existential belief that I can't sacrifice on. So it's important to understand that those distinctions are worthy of doing what others would consider to be counter signaling. But yeah, I to your point too. When you see people like the Carolyn Levitts or whatever, I mean, it's just it's such a it's very blackpilling that these people can sit in their position and try and dismiss, you know, the genuine claims. You know, I have mixed feelings about like when you can take people seriously, because I'm 27, which I don't think is young, but some people do. And I do think I am at the point now where, and I'm not claiming to be some like deep political theorist. I think, and more generally, my gift is narrative rather than anything. But the point is that if the older generations disregard the complaints coming from what is primarily the dissident right at this point, they're going to become the handmaiden for American socialism. There's no doubt about that. So, and
Yeah, I
Pete
mean, you're
Quinones,
seeing it happen on the left already. The fact that the DSA is rising and the Chuck
exactly,
Schumers of the world are kind of like, yeah, what do we do going forward? And
ex-
inevitably, that's happening on the right.
and you know, Pete Quinones, who was at one point a libertarian, I'm a big fan of, but he was saying that the future is either right authoritarian or left authoritarian. You can say you love liberty, you can do all these things, and that's fine. But that's where things are headed. And, you know,
He also
it's
said demographics are destiny.
Pete Quinones.
Yes, which is
Yeah, of
great.
course. Yeah, yeah, definitely. And which is absolutely true. But the point really is that like you don't get anything if you're operating in reality, you don't get anything out of insisting that, well, I don't think that these kids have a good enough work ethic. It's like, okay, but if you're denying the you know, I mean, I don't like the saying that like perception is reality, but I would say political perception becomes state reality. And and so in regard to that, think about what the left does with racial issues. I mean, what is it? 9 unarmed blacks per year are shot by police, and liberals think it's like 100,000 to a million or something like that. And it's like that's what matters. The truth of it doesn't matter. Now, you should, and Dave Green mentioned this the other day, like it should be a it should be a like an opportunity for the right to have an ideology that is actually tied to reality, but it's not. Like we squander it every time. And so my point in saying that is if we can unify our message under, and I don't mean unify like, you know, everybody come together. I'm saying unify our consolidated message with reality in a way that's, you know, inspiring and inciting, because the conservative message is unbelievably boring. I mean, there's
Oh yeah,
nothing to it anymore at all. It's not real. I mean, they're the only real liberals left is the conservatives. Um,
correct.
and and so anyway, I do think that it's been a wild last 5 years seeing pretty much liberalism just get completely discredited across the board.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, and like you said, the only people preserving liberalism, especially 1990s liberalism, are the
yeah,
Republican Party. And but you know, it's good that we have people like Brylan Hollyhand out there going to tell us who our greatest ally is. Um,
I know,
but
right?
last thing I wanted to ask you before we wrap it
Hmm.
up here is, yeah, it's kind of a loaded question, but about the politics of it going forward is it's pretty obvious that Republicans are going to get their asses whooped coming
Yeah,
up here in a couple of months here in November. 2028, you know, the JD Vance has been on this podcast. I've talked to him. I knew him years ago, and I like the idea of a JD Vance, although I don't like the Palantir Peter Thiel connections. But then it's like, who else are you going to have? Marco Rubio, who's owned by the Ellisons. You have Trump, who's run by Ronald Lauder and Miriam Adelson. Um, Eventually the baby boomers are, I mean, they're literally dying off right now. What do you think, well, like, where do you think the Republican Party is going to be? Are they going to continue school marming their way through 26, like the Jay Burden has mentioned, the Sampson option for the GOP, all the way into 2028? Are they purposely tanking things so we have no choice but to try to vote for a neocon? Or like, what can you forecast between right now and probably the next 8 years?
Okay, my most pessimistic perspective, which I don't know if this is true, but I think more people are coming to this conclusion. It almost seems like the co-opted right, the co-opted MAGA, is destroying itself intentionally to justify the rise of an authoritarian left. Um, Now, I don't know that for sure, but you have to also think about and I'll be somewhat coded here, but those who are pulling the strings beyond the United States not only are working in the benefit of their other host nation or you know home, but they're also seeking the destruction of the United States as a whole. So if you're only looking at it through the lens of, why is the GOP, the MAGA now all of a sudden, going to war with Iran, all these things, is it to benefit, Israel? Yes. But is it also a double-edged sword that is hopefully going to bring down, the US as a whole? Yes, of course. That is also the objective here. And so like I do think that the people at the top understand like the dialectic flow of politics, and they're going to, I mean, they're building the infrastructure for the globalized panopticon. I mean, that is just true. And they've been very open about these ideas. And I think that the only way that you can really justify that would be through the cataclysmic implosion of the GOP and MAGA right. And it's still bizarre to see because it's so it's like so suicidal. That would be my most pessimistic view. My most optimistic view was that these people are just complete idiots, and that they are going to try and crown JD Vance as the successor of MAGA to I think as my friend Basil talks about, like the coalition between pharma, defense, and all these kind of oligarchic mechanisms at the top, that really is like spearheaded by the Peter Thiel underlying coalition, political coalition, right, which obviously funded Vance and everything like that. It's very possible that they're just trying to kind of continue looting the nation and propelling the ship in that direction to maximize materially whatever they can out of it. That would be the most benign outcome. But that even all that excludes the energy behind the left. And as you give them these inciting factors, I mean, one thing I that made me really reconsider the intentions going on was during the Minneapolis deportations, where I think they deported 3,000 people, and in the process, mobilized thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of leftists against Trump. So you're getting, like Fuentes talks about, the performative cruelty. You're inciting the maximal reaction while getting the minimal outcome. And as you do that once, okay, you miscalculated. You do that every single time. It's like, well, what are you trying to incite here? So I like how Pete Quinones talks about, like, I focusing on the national is maybe a bit more theatrical than anything at this point. I think it's not unimportant, but the votes are not gonna change the system. I think we all know that, especially after Trump's second term.
Yeah.
So where
I
that
mean,
goes, I don't know, but I mean that's the conclusion I think it's safe to draw.
Yeah, it's when you realize that even the Republican Party are not your friends, they have nothing but contempt. The Cato Institute and
Yep.
all these publications are not in your favor. They don't, in fact, they find you as contemptible as the left does. And the good news is Gen Z is realizing that in real time and doing something about it to the point where they're writing books and making YouTube videos and doing a great job, like my guest Joey Oliver here is has been today. Go check him out. I am subscribed over there, the RW Coalition, the Right Wing Coalition on YouTube, and go check out his book, American History Z, Gen Z's Journey to the Far Right, with the foreword by Uncle Jared Taylor.
Yes, sir.
And you are going to be at the American Renaissance Conference this November, right?
Yep, that's right. I'll be speaking there.
I, I really want to go to that. It's always around my wife's birthday, so
Yeah.
it's like it's weird to say like, "Hey, honey, I know it's your
Yeah.
birthday, but I got to hear Jared Taylor and Kevin Deanna make a speech." It's
Right.
just
No,
kind of
I get it.
strange.
Yeah.
But no, it's great work. Love having you on, and I really do appreciate it. Best of luck going forward, and yeah, sky's the limit for you. I wish that my generation had their shit together the way you guys have at 27. That, when I was 27, that was when Trump came around, and I thought Donald Trump and MAGA was going to represent this new generation, whether it was alt-right or just some middle finger against the John
Yeah.
McCains of the world, and instead it just kind of reinforced that the neocons still have some kind of stronghold, as we of course saw in Kentucky just a couple of months ago with Thomas Massey, but. Uh, there is hope. There is hope going forward, and I hope more people will hear these conversations. By the way, also stop debating. I'm tired of the debates.
Yes. Oh,
Debate
totally.
club is
I
over.
love it. Yes.
Oh gosh,
It's over.
when you have leftists going like, "Good, I'm glad that racist podcaster is dead," and then you have
Yeah.
the right going, Tucker Carlson said hummus eaters in Jerusalem. How
Yeah. Yeah.
dare he? We lost the plot. Well,
It's over.
let's stay on the plot. Let's stay on the ball, and I think you're doing a great job with that, Joey. So I really do appreciate it, and I maybe if I can move things around, I hope to see you in November down at Ameren in Tennessee.
For sure. Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
And thank you for listening and watching the Check Your Brain podcast. I'll be back with you next Wednesday with another free episode. For the rest of you who are on Patreon, I'll get you something. I get a couple of more episodes per week. But thank you, everybody, for checking out the show. And yeah, talk to you soon. Bye, everyone.